Hi, everyone. My name is Yuanheng Arthur Wang, and I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Applied Linguistics at Penn State. I'm also an instructor and a teaching mentor in the program. So today I am presenting on part of the Penn State Global Career Development Workshop for international students. And my part is called The Devil is in the Language, because I study language. Right? So here's the agenda for today. We're going to look at two broad parts that I think are really, really relevant and useful for your success at Penn State as an international student and beyond the university community context. Okay? The first part is preparing for an effective resume. We're going to look at the basic structures and definition of resume. And we're going to talk about using action verbs and quantifiers, which I will explain in just a minute, when you are writing your resume. The second component is about emailing a professor for a recommendation letter in an appropriate manner, which is very, very common for students in the US who would like to apply for internships, scholarships, fellowships, awards, or graduate programs after they graduate. Right, so it's important that we learn all of the nuts and bolts of emailing your professor. We're going to identify the appropriate actions that are commonly seen in such an email. We're also going to talk about the underlying reasons, like why we write such emails in such a manner. Okay, so let's begin with the first part. So what is a resume, and why do we need a resume? Now, in the US professional context, resume is normally a one-page document. Normally, it's one page, especially for junior level or entry-level positions. Okay, it's a one-page document that presents an overview of your experience. Not every experience that you have, but experience that is relevant to specific promotional purposes, whether you're applying for a job, for an internship, for an award, for a scholarship, or for grad school, right? The purpose, your specific promotional purpose, determines what you put and what you include on your resume. So why is a resume necessary? Well, we are kind of like through resume selling ourselves or marketing ourselves as competent, qualified, and attractive, right? Based on our specific promotional purposes. So who are we promoting to, right? We write our resumes for professionals who have the power and responsibilities to evaluate and determine whether your promotion is effective or successful, right? HR managers, your immediate supervisors, faculty members who serve on awards review committee or graduate admissions committee, et cetera, right? So those are the people who make the decisions about whether you get hired or admitted or not. And I also put sometimes machines right here because nowadays it becomes increasingly common for resumes to be first identified and analyzed by specialized computer programs where they retrieve and identify keywords from your resume and match those keywords with the keywords in a job post, which outlines their expectations and requirements on the applicant, right? And based on this machine learning, right, analytic result, your resumes get filtered and then get sent to the actual people who make the decisions. Right. So machines have become an increasingly integral part of the hiring process nowadays. So where do you put your resume? In a very, very traditional sense, you put your resume in print format, which means that you put it on a piece of paper like a Word document or a PDF document, right? But there are also occasions where you need to format and expand your resume in kind of like this multimodal or digital format, like in LinkedIn or your own professional portfolio or your own professional website. Okay? So what is normally included in a resume in the U.S. academic professional context? Right? This list of information is normally included if you're writing your resume and you are using it in the United States. This list of information right here on the right normally is not included because they involve privacy and legal issues that many times are not allowed to be disclosed to your future employers, and your future employers cannot even ask you for this information, especially during the hiring process. Okay, photo, nationality, date of birth, family, marital status. This information may be relevant and they may be conventional to be included in resumes in countries and cultures outside of the U.S. But just to keep in mind that you shouldn't or do not have to include this information, this list of information right here on your resume, and your future employers are not allowed to ask them from you. Okay? And this is just basically what a general resume looks like, right? It's one page with headings and subheadings with different sections indicating different places where you highlight your experience, right? Which is pretty common and standard. Okay? So now comes to the fun part. As international students or multilingual learners, right? For many of us, including myself, English is not our first language. So over the years, as I worked with international students, multilingual professionals, I increasingly realized that a lot of times that we have difficulties or challenges when writing our resumes, not because we're not familiar with the content, is that we're not fully familiar with the language that is appropriate in a resume, right? So I'm going to talk about specifically one aspect of language to be used on the resume, which I call a secret weapon, meaning action verbs. Action verbs are verbs that carry out a lot of actions, right? That highlight your core competence and skills in relation to the job or internship or graduate school program that you're applying to, right? I have prepared a list or these 3 lists of action verbs that are categorized based on their meaning and their emphasis. For example, analytic and technical skills, you analyzed something, you calculated, coded, or computed something, right? You modeled or programmed something, right? Leadership skills, you administered, directed, managed, orchestrated, supervised. Communication skills, you advertised, campaigned, composed, designed, promoted, translated, etc., etc. Action verbs are very, very useful because if you observe the word or the language in the job post, you will notice a lot of action verbs used there. So your employers are really sending you these hidden messages or key information that they want people to have certain competence or certain types of competence or certain categories of skills, right? And those informations are normally implied explicitly or implicitly in the language of the job posting. So it's important for us to look at the job posting, determine what kind of action verbs that they use, and then determine what kind of action verbs that we use to match what they ask, right? And if you go online, if you go to the Penn State career service website, they have numerous resources and materials to expand on the notion of action verbs. That is why I'm not going to talk about this in a lot of detail today. So let's talk about the specific use of action verbs, right? These 2 sections come from different sections from 2 different international students' resumes that I've worked with these international students over the years, and this is something that they put on their resume, which I think is really, really effective in terms of their use of action verbs. For the first one, you can see it's from the first line, we see that the highlighted part is the location or the name of the institution you work for, and there's location right here. On the second line, there's the title or position of your internship, right? Date range, normally for the duration of your internship. And then look at these beautiful action verbs: consulted, analyzed, and estimated, right? All those fancy action verbs that may be favored by people who study business and finance and marketing, right? And then for the second one, we see managed, wrote, and promoted, right? Again, very concrete, very powerful verbs that show people or stakeholders, meaning your employers, right, what you can do and what you have done. So in addition to secret action verbs as a secret weapon, there's another secret weapon that I often recommend international students to consider using. It's called quantifiers, meaning expressions that comes with numbers, right? Quantifiers are very useful and are generally favored in the eyes of stakeholders, meaning employers and admissions committee members, right? Because they highlight tangible outcomes or products that you have accomplished or achieved, right, in your work. So one suggestion that I always recommend international students is when you're writing your resume, always think about the tangible outcomes and the impact, and think about in an authentic and accurate, right, as accurate as possible sense to indicate the quantified sites or information in your resume. So we see these number of annual sales revenue, 3 social media accounts, 1,200 plus followers, 5 articles, 120 posts, 600 views per article or tweet, right? Again, they show outcomes and accomplishments, something that you have done in the past, and also something that you may be able to achieve in the future in relation to what you're applying for. Okay. One detail I would like to highlight right here. Do you guys see right here? 3, 5, 120. I used different ways of indicating the numbers. I spelled the number 3 instead of using the actual number 3. But right here, I used the actual number 120. Why did I do that? Well, in a very, very traditional professional communication sense, the convention is that we tend to spell the number for numbers that are smaller than 10, including 10. So from 0 to 10, we just write the ZERO as 0 or TEN as 10. But any numbers that are larger than 10, starting from 11, right? Starting from 11, we just use the number, right? I'm not 100% sure about why people do that. But I said, this is a very, very traditional or conventional way of doing numbers or highlighting numbers, especially in professional writing. But this tradition has become less and less, decreasingly, what I would say is this tradition is not that 100% recognized nowadays, right? So I always recommend international students to use this as a safe practice, right? It wouldn't hurt you if you use numbers, but also it wouldn't hurt you, I would say, 100% if you stick to this professional way of using quantifiers or writing quantifiers. Okay? So we just talked about action verbs and quantifiers as 2 secret weapons, right, when building your resume. So let's take a look at this task. how would you reframe the duties of Tom? Imagine that Tom is a current international student at Penn State. And how would you reframe the duties and accomplishments of Tom using stronger action verbs and relevant quantifiers? So Tom worked as a Penn State international student orientation leader. He was responsible for preparing for and making campus tours, creating games and activities for international students, helped to hold an orientation session on academic integrity, right? These are the things that Tom has done before while he was an Penn State international orientation leader. So what can we do to make what Tom has done a little bit more stronger, a little bit more concrete, using stronger action verbs and quantifiers? This is something that I wrote, right, based on this scenario. We use orchestrated and led. We use developed and implement, right? Orchestrated and led campus tours, developed and implemented games, supported to host an orientation session, blah, 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 right? They demonstrate Tom's organization skills, teamwork skills, and also communication skills, right? I also added quantifiers. Of course, in this scenario, I made up those details, right? 6 campus tours, 200 plus students, 12 games, 6 events, 120 plus attendees, right? Use quantifiers whenever possible. This is a mini application. So what we just talked about, 2 secret weapons when writing resumes, action verbs and quantifiers. Again, as I said, Penn State has numerous resources for you to build your resume, from the career services, or even from your own department and college. You may have specialized career support advisors, right, to help you. So that's why what I just talked about is a little bit more general, right, than you expected from a workshop. So please use those resources whenever possible. I'm going to move to the next component, emailing your professor for a recommendation letter. Okay. Recommendation letters are very, very conventional when students are applying for internships, awards or scholarships, or graduate program, or applying to graduate programs, right? As an instructor, I've received requests from students, all kinds of students over the years, asking me to provide recommendation letters. And it has been brought to my attention that a lot of times students, they don't really understand, or they are not really familiar with the specific ways of asking for recommendation letters, or asking for recommendation letters from faculty members in an appropriate manner. It's not their fault, because many of them, they are not familiar with the notion of recommendation letters, and many of them, they have not been trained, right, properly in terms of how to ask for a recommendation letter. So let's take a look at these 3 messages right here. 3 messages right here, right? Which one do you think would be the most reader-friendly one? So they all come from a student asking recommendation letter to Arthur, or from Arthur, from Arthur. Which one do you think is more reader-friendly one? And by reader, I mean, if you were Arthur, which email would you respond? Or which email would you respond and say, yes, I would love to write your write your recommendation letter for you? Okay. The answer is really obvious. It's the last one. Well, not only because it's the longest one, right? Because the amount of information right there is appropriate, the tone and style is appropriate, right? And also the content of that email is really, really audience friendly. Again, audience being, if you are Arthur, the teacher right here, right? First, with the first one, right? Hey, Arthur, please never ever address your professor as hey, because they're not your friends, they're not your peers. Especially in writing, use hi or dear, right? To create and convey a respectful tone, right? So let's take a look at the last email right here. I actually numbered the sentences right here. There are numbered the sentences right here. And as you can see, each sentence or each set of sentences has a clear purpose. So sentence number 1, my name is Tom Wang, a third-year international student at Penn State. I had your ESL 15 class in fall 2021 and really enjoyed your class. So the underlying notion is, this is who I am. I was wondering if you could write a recommendation letter for me because I'm applying for an international student scholarship at Penn State. This is what I need. The award recognizes students with leadership and service in the international student community at Penn State. I believe my work in Penn State CISA and for the Penn State Global programs makes me a suitable candidate. The deadline of the application is March 1st of 2022. This is a background, right? This is something that I'm going to do to help you understand why I need a recommendation letter, why am I doing certain things, and what I need exactly from you. Right? I'm happy to share with you my resume and a Word application essay, as well as other materials that may be helpful, right? This is what I can do to help you. Essentially, when you're asking recommendation letters from your professors, well, professors and instructors, it is part of their professional duties to write recommendation letters for students. But it's not their professional duties to write recommendation letters for every single student who approached them, right? So you need to think about ways of asking recommendation letters from your professors appropriately, and also you're also going to volunteer to provide them some kind of materials, right? Your resume, your statement of purpose, your award application essay, something that they can take a look, they can think about who you are, and they can maybe adapt some materials from your personal statements or resume, right, in their letter. So basically, you are giving them something to start with. They're not developing your recommendation letter from nowhere, right? And finally, these are my being polite and thoughtful. I was wondering if you would you please consider? Thank you so much for your time in advance. A lot of hedges, right? A lot of politeful expressions, right? Again, when you're asking recommendation letters, you want to do this in an appropriate and a respectful manner. And these are the specific ways of being polite and thoughtful. So why are we doing all kinds of things? Why are we introducing ourselves? What's the point of sharing the award requirements? What's the point of offering to share your materials? And what's the point of being polite and thoughtful, right? Everything comes down to the notion of audience. In this case, it's your professor. Introducing yourself to your professor is for them to recall your identity and your relationship with them, right? Unless you and the professor know each other really, really well, like you take their classes for many, many times over the past 3 or 4 years, right? It is very common for professors don't really remember or recognize a student immediately. And it's also very common and it's fair for students to forget who their professors are in previous semesters, right? So introducing yourself can really help your audience recognize who you are, and they know that you are a student and this is something that they need to pay attention to, right? So why are you sharing the award requirements? Well, again, it's for your audience to know exactly what you need or expect from them. What kind of stuff that you need, how much time or resources that you need from them, et cetera, right? And while you're sharing your materials, again, like I said, while it's the professors, part of their professional duties to help to write recommendation letters, they are not obligated to respond to every single student, right? So the more materials and the more information that you can share to the professor, the easier that will make their lives, right, when they write your recommendation letters. So again, it comes down to the notion of think about your audience and your reader. So what's the point of being polite and thoughtful, right? To demonstrate to them that you are an effective communicator and you respect and appreciate their time and expertise, right? So these are very, very obvious. So I'm going to go back to this slide right here, right? When you are writing your emails to your professors asking for recommendation letters, always ask yourself, who do I want to be? Do I want to be the first student who write an email like this? There's nothing wrong with it in the language or grammar, right? The grammar is clear, the sentence structure clear, but it's not really appropriate in this context, right? Do I really want to be this kind of student, right? Again, it's not your fault because you have not been trained. You're not familiar with the notion. But right now, since you have a little bit more understanding of of asking for recommendation letters, I believe this is something that you would like to be, right? So in this mini presentation, we just talked about two parts, right? Number one is how do you write your resume? We look at the common structures, what to include and what not to include. Specifically, we looked at two secret weapons, right? Using action verbs to highlight your core competence and your skills, and also use quantifiers whenever possible, right? To highlight the accomplishments and outcomes that are tangible, right, in your work. And the second part, we look at the specific ways of asking for recommendation letters from your professors, and we also talked about why we're doing things in particular ways, right? So here comes the summary. The devil is in the language, right? All the things that we talked about, verbs, quantifiers, appropriate ways, expressions of asking for recommendation letters comes down to the language, right? So be a doer, use action verbs. Be a quantifier, try to quantify whenever possible and appropriate. And also be mindful and audience-oriented. Always think about who your audience is, what is the context, what is your relationship with them, and what you need from them, okay? Here comes the summary of the workshop, and this is my cat, where it was a very, very scholarly look, okay? So thank you, everyone, for your time and patience for watching today's workshop. I wish all of you the very best in your journeys at Penn State, and I look forward to possibly meeting with all of you in the future. Thank you.